Pikachu, Ash's starter and star Pokemon that has followed him through all of his journeys. We have seen them fight through many trials together and overcome some challenging feats. Aside from the rare occurrences when Ash was choosing to potentially leave Pikachu behind, we have never seen them leave one another's side. But what if I told you that there is a way that Ash's Pikachu can actually be a dad? And that is what I'm here to reveal today, because I believe that Ash's Pikachu is actually a father. That's right, everyone, this is the Raikaze here, and we are about to dive into one of my theories that I've always had, and that is going to be of the fact that Ash's Pikachu is in fact a dad. Now, of course, with this being a theory-based topic, we will have to throw some of those type of things that are considered not canon or possibly canon, because there's a mixture of information that's out there based upon what is determined as canon and what's not canon. But we're gonna have to basically throw a lot of that out of the window, but at the same time take a lot of the things that happen in the series and the movies, put those things together, and we can determine a particular Pokemon that is very closely related to Ash's Pikachu, which could actually mean that this Pokemon is an offspring of Ash's Pikachu. So buckle up and let's dive into the story of how Ash's Pikachu has become a father. But first, thank you for coming and watching this video here today. If you do like this content, be sure to hit the like, share, subscribe, and have those notifications turned on so you can see when the next videos go live. Also, a lot of you know that I do play the Pokemon video game competitively. On this channel you may see some of the fun builds and things like that, but if you are really looking towards trying to build your game on the competitive level, be sure to hop over to the Card Shark Dojo YouTube page. Over there I team up with Ric Flair McNair as we focus currently on the Pokemon franchise, both in the VGC as well as the TCG. There we have discussions of the competitive format, different strong teams, and how we can build teams of our own to work in the competitive format. So if you're looking to up your game to that competitive level, be sure to hop on over there and hit the like, share, subscribe, and have those notifications turned on, because without you, we won't make it. So once again, thank you for being here, and now back to the video. So if you have not watched the anime, you are missing on the fact that Pikachu was in fact a wild Pichu that was traveling along with some Kangaskhan, and it was lonely, and it had developed this little friendship with one of the baby Kangaskhan, and as it just was growing in that family, and just how it was just having a good time in its life and whatnot. And then after it was just basically getting pretty big as even a Pichu, it decided that it needed to go ahead and leave. But as its love for the Kangaskhan family, and as it remembers that great friendship that it had, and as it was preparing to try to leave the Kangaskhan family because it knew it was basically growing too much, it evolved into the Pikachu that we know. And then it took off, and then next thing you know, was more than likely caught by Professor Oak, who was then going to give it to a trainer. Now come to think of it, at that point, Ash was the only person that got an evolved Pokemon as a starter, because everybody else had to start from the first stage. But yeah, Ash had an evolved Pokemon this entire time. Go figure. So, with that being said, as we are going through that little background, we are not talking about back then, because it was a Pichu, and as we know from the games, the baby egg groups cannot actually make any baby Pokemon. So as Pikachu was a Pichu, it was not doing that, and it was around all the Kangaskhan, so that just did not happen. Pichu evolved into Pikachu and then was caught by Professor Oak and then was handed over to Ash, and after that particular point they were basically always together. You know, Team Rocket snatched them up a couple times, a good number of times rather, but it's not like Pikachu had any chance to get with any of the other Pokemon at that moment in time to make an egg. Now it did it. So you may be wondering, where are you getting this theory from then? If Pikachu was always with Ash and we've seen it throughout the entire anime, how in the world could there be a offspring that is going to be related to Ash's Pikachu? Well, now we're about to have to hop into the very first movie.
There goes Alakazam! Dugong! Vileplume! Sandshrew, Nidoqueen, Vaporeon. But me, I got a special place in my tail for this one.
Now, if you remember this scene from the movie, these Pokeballs contain the Pokemon from the other trainers that were basically brought over to Mew Island that Mewtwo was basically about to just make clones of and then was going to destroy the entire human race. Those Pokemon that were in those Pokeballs went through the machine, and as they go through the machine, their DNA is extracted, and then the Pokemon is then reproduced. There's a couple caveats that I've learned about these Pokemon as well that we're going to get into here in just very shortly, but just keeping it on the bare minimum as of right now, these Pokemon just went through, nothing's interrupting them, their DNA is replicated, and then a clone is made of an exact copy of the original. However, there was a slight difference that occurred when Ash's Pikachu went through. Ash was, for some reason, super focused only on Pikachu, because when his other Pokemon got caught, he wasn't really chasing them down. But when Pikachu was getting chased down, he was like, oh no, you're not going to get Pikachu. But yeah, nonetheless, he went mainly for Pikachu, and he was holding on to that Pokeball, and as it was trying to extract the data, he was ripping it out. So it was copying as much of the DNA from Ash's Pikachu, but there was a slight error that did occur during that process. Therefore, the Pikachu that came out had altered ears. And that is going to be the biggest key of us identifying who the offspring is of this Pokemon. And so, of course, for those of you that play Pokemon Go, because I actually discovered that as I was doing some research here, you all have had an event of the clone Pikachu that was available to you all to actually capture. So with that being said, you are aware of the difference in the ears. So let's go back to the very beginning. We have our Ash's Pikachu, and then we have it going through the Mew cloning device machine, and then we have it then creating the clone Pikachu. And this clone is supposed to be of the same DNA as Ash's Pikachu minus the ears. So there is a slight variation on its DNA. So having a slight difference in the ears means that there's something in its DNA that was replicated a little bit off, which will then affect how an offspring is created. So next, what we got to do is go into some supporting data. It's going to be kind of a stretch, but at the same time, there is a reason that these things do make sense. So we're going to hop into it. So just bear with me, but we will see a very famous Pokemon that is going to be of the offspring of Ash's Pikachu. So keep following me. We have the Ash's Pikachu going through the clone machine, and we have the clone Ash's Pikachu. Just has altered ears, but it still has the DNA of Ash's Pikachu. Stick with me there. Now we move on.
Wow, without a Pokemon breeder around, it's amazing they all look so healthy.
I wonder if their parents are nearby.
They're watching over them from up there. They're all very protective and very proud.
Yes, you just saw that correctly. Now I know Pokemon Mewtwo Returns has a lot of plot holes and things of the sort, but a lot of things has in fact come to fruition from that movie that in my mind I feel as though that movie becomes more canon than we realize. Because for some examples that I'm just going to be able to name off here, first off is that their very first meeting that they had with Mewtwo in Mewtwo Strikes Back, he made everybody forget. So therefore, when in this movie in Pokemon Mewtwo Returns, nobody really knew who Mewtwo was. Meowth was talking about Mewtwo, and then all the characters was like, oh, okay, that's Mewtwo. That's who Meowth was talking about. So they didn't know who Mewtwo was, even though they met Mewtwo before. Then you go to the future in the Pokemon Journeys episodes, and Mewtwo is in the cave with the Pokemon that it rescued. When Ash and Go confronted Mewtwo, Ash was like, Mewtwo. Go didn't know who that Pokemon was, and then he's like, it kind of looks like Mew. It has the energy signal as Mew, but it's not Mew. What is that? And Ash already knew who that Pokemon was because it was canon that he remembered who that Pokemon was. And at the end of Pokemon Mewtwo Returns, Mewtwo did not make them forget because it had more trust in Ash's group, but it made, like Team Rocket and all the rest of them forget. So all of that was in fact very important to say, hey, Ash now knows who Mewtwo is, and here we are in the past when Ash met up with Mewtwo and now is truly confirming, oh, you are Mewtwo. So that's just a little side note. So that's one big point. Next thing is we may look at this scene and say, oh, well, you got baby Nidoqueens. That's very weird because, yes, it's seeing those Pokemon just suddenly popping out. That was a little weird. However, at the same time, yes, have we been able to catch Pokemon at like low levels? I believe there's even a glitch. I think it's red, blue, and yellow, or just red and blue, that you can get the Nidoking at like level 107, give it to Rare Candy or something, and it starts this level over, so then you have a level 1 Nidoking. So, you know, that maybe have that nostalgia there. Or, here's my actual theory, is that because these Pokemon are clones, their offspring are supposed to only create Pokemon that look like them. However, there is also another issue that does counter that. Because if you remember on the no egg group that I showed earlier in terms of like the Pichu and the baby Pokemon that were on that list, at the near to the top of the list, you will see Nidorina and Nidoqueen are also on that list, that they are not supposed to be able to make eggs. However, as you can see, there are baby Nidoqueens. So, in some form of fashion, this Nidoqueen, that is a clone, was able to create a new set of baby Nidoqueens. Interesting. So basically, we have to say, hey, with this genetic update, they allowed this Pokemon to have the ability to reproduce. Now, that would be given that the Pokemon is able to pass on its full genetic code, so it therefore has the entirety of the previous code to then become the same exact Pokemon, but just in baby form. But what about the clone that came from Ash's Pikachu? Because if we recall, that Pokemon was already altered because Ash was disrupting the machine while it was being generated. Therefore, there can be an altered code to where, as this Pokemon is able to produce an offspring later on, because at the end of the Mewtwo Returns movie, that is when the Pokemon do in fact actually fully split off and they go on their own journeys. Therefore, that clone Pikachu was able to go into the wild and potentially reproduce. But if it doesn't have its full genetic code to then create a new offspring of baby Pikachus with maybe altered ears or something of the sort, what if this particular Pikachu is able to create an offspring, but due to the altering in the genetic code during the DNA sampling process, what if these offspring are coming out a little bit different? For example, these Nidoqueens are going to stay as Nidoqueens, but I mean, they're fully evolved, but they're just the exact replicas. What if those Rhyhorns are unable to evolve? Because they are an exact replica of the clone Rhyhorn. So if the clone Pikachu was trying to make more offspring that's supposed to resemble itself, but yet they still won't be able to evolve, but yet the genetic code is only holding the previous genetic material, i.e. pre-evolution, what if a Pokemon was to come out looking a little bit odd and unable to evolve? That's right, everyone. The Pokemon that I am discussing at this moment in time is the spiky-eared Pichu. The spiky-eared Pichu is the time-traveling Pichu that appeared in the Pokemon movie Arceus: The Jewel of Life. Also, in the video games, in Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver, there is a way that if you have like an event shiny Pikachu or Raichu, and it has to be an event one that has like a fateful encounter on its like summary page. Then if you take it while it's on your party and you go to the shrine in the Alex Forest, then the spiky-eared Pichu is going to appear and you're going to be able to catch it, and then you have it on your party. However, with this Pichu, you cannot evolve it. So that is a big key. Now you might say, now hold on, in the video games, Professor Elm is saying, hey, no, you can't actually trade this Pokemon to a later generation. That will be to Generation 5 because it was affected by the time traveling that it was already experiencing in the past. But that's just a video game explanation. It doesn't really clarify everything, and then in the movie, as you travel back in time and go into the Arceus Jewel of Life movie, that is where you meet that spiky-eared Pichu. So, yes, it has been something that is affected in a long time ago, but nothing really identifies where this spiky-eared Pichu came from. And, of course, as we know with a lot of different anime, that when you travel through time, you create alternate timelines. Even in the Scarlet and Violet series, that after you do the things with like the Terapagos and you take the Scarlet or Violet book back over to that big crystal cavern area on the lake, whatever. I can't remember the name of it out on the top of my head, but that is where you meet the professor from the future or past or whatnot, and then you're giving them the book, the same book that they were referencing in the very beginning that they should have already had, which created a form of a paradox. Yes, we create alternate timelines and we also create different paradoxes. So therefore, this spiky-eared Pichu, though you meet it in the past, does not necessarily mean that this spiky-eared Pichu came from the past. Well, super past, like with the Arceus and stuff like that. My theory is this, going all the way back to the start. We have Ash's Pikachu. We have already established that it equates that of the clone Pikachu. The only thing that is different is because of the ears, as Ash was disrupting the machine. Now, if this Pokemon then created the offspring of the spiky-eared Pichu, it would have the same typical trait of the previous Pokemon, that they do not evolve. So if the spiky-eared Pichu was from an altered genetic code to where it cannot evolve, so just the same way as Ash's Pikachu just wouldn't evolve anyway, so maybe it's just in its code anyway. But then we have the clone Pikachu that probably more than likely will not be evolving, and then we have this spiky-eared Pichu because of the altered genetic code when it was being created in the first place. As the spiky-eared Pichu is born, it now is like, oh, I cannot evolve, therefore I will not ever have any offspring. And then it's probably like, oh, maybe if I have other Pichus that I've met along my way, oh, they went ahead and evolved, they all became Pikachus, but for some reason I just won't evolve, and I have this weird ear thing, so I don't know where I belong. And then next you know, it finally meets up with Celebi and is like, oh, hey, you're being really nice with me, let's time travel together. And it starts time traveling and then somehow ends up in the past in the Arceus Jewel of Life movie, and that is where it will meet with Ash's Pikachu. So in a sense, it's dad, and then they help each other out to save like some of the other Pokemon to free them from the cages and things of the sort, where they then go to trying to fix all of the things that was going on in that movie. If you haven't watched the movie, just go and watch the movie and you can actually see all of that. But nonetheless, this is a way of how we create the entire loop of where the spiky-eared Pichu more than likely had originated from before it started its time traveling adventure with Celebi. And as it is in fact a child of the clone Pikachu, but the clone is the same thing as Ash's Pikachu, therefore in the roundabout way, this spiky-eared Pichu is the daughter of Ash's Pikachu. But what do you guys think? Am I super reaching, or do you believe that this is actually a way that this can make some sense? Leave me a comment below and tell me what you think. And also at the same time, be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and turn on those notifications to see when the next videos go live. But as of right now, this is going to be the Raikaze signing off. You all know what to do. You stay strong, and you power on. Catch y'all later.